Who are the angels imprisoned within the ravines of Mount Hermon? They are the occupants of the eternal dungeon, holding captive those who once belonged to the ranks of the Watchers. But what sin could be so horrific as to cause divine beings to be bound in ultimate iron chains and plunged deep into the darkness of the earth's core? They did not merely betray heaven. They sowed crimes that mutated the very bloodline of humanity and taught man forbidden knowledge that led to destruction. The consequence of that unholy descent was the birth of monstrous giants and a brutal sentence lasting 70 generations in absolute solitude. And why exactly 70 generations? Before exploring these mysteries, let us leave an amen to connect with the protective embrace of God. May He dispel all evil thoughts and keep our souls at peace under His power. Amen. Mount Hermon reigns at the 33rd latitude of the earth, the very place where the boundary between heaven and earth was breached. Beneath the ancient rock strata of this mountain, a seal was established by the decree of the Most High. This is the dungeon holding Semyaza and the legion of fallen angels, entities who abandoned their holy stations to choose rebellion. They are bound in the deep heart of the earth with eternal chains, weighed down by the mass of the mountains, so they may never rise before the appointed time of judgment. The location of latitude 33 is no coincidence in the map of creation. This is the coordinate chosen by the Watchers from the upper firmament to descend to earth. At this exact intersection, the order of heaven was challenged by a collective blood oath. Entities that once bore divine glory exchanged it for the flesh of the dust, and it was here that the justice of the Lord of hosts executed the ultimate sentence. Those who once sought the power to rule the earth are now shackled beneath the very foundations of the mountain upon which they first set foot. Within the dark fissures at the base of Mount Hermon, Semyaza and his cohorts lie in wait in brutal isolation. Each link of the iron chains tightening around these immortal entities is a decree of righteousness, separating them from the light of the sun and the life of humanity. They were not immediately destroyed by the sword, but imprisoned to witness the decay of the monstrous lineage they created. The sentence fixed a term of 70 generations beneath the earth, confining the rebels in absolute darkness until the day of final judgment. Traces of the fallen legion still persist in the ruins atop the cursed peak. The chains beneath Mount Hermon serve as a reminder of the forbidden boundary broken between the divine and the human. The time of the sentence is drifting toward the final days of the 70-generation term. The truth about those shackled in the dark stems from a covenant of rebellion established on the highest peak, where pride led radiant angels into the abyss of eternal perdition. The oath of the Watchers, the fall. At the highest peak of Mount Hermon, 200 entities from the ranks of the Grigori gathered to commit an unprecedented rebellion. Here, the boundaries of holiness fractured as the Watchers abandoned their positions in heaven to look down upon the beauty of humans with eyes of lust. Semyaza, the leader, stood among his peers on the cold stone summit, where mist shrouded the germinating treachery. He saw through the hesitation in the hearts of the angelic legion and forced them all into an irrevocable agreement. A blood oath was sworn upon this peak, binding the fates of 200 angels into a covenant of damnation. Semyaza declared his fear that his comrades would lose heart, leaving him to bear the guilt alone for a great and wicked deed. To shatter that fear, They all uttered the anathema, a self-cursing oath stating that anyone who turned back would suffer the most terrible punishment. They were no longer separate individuals. They became a unified mass of the fallen, chained together by their own vow before being bound by the chains of the Archangel Michael. The oath on Mount Hermon transformed this mountain into a place of taboo and gloom. As the collective curses were spoken, the celestial nature of the Grigori began to be stained by worldly will. They chose to leave the light of the Creator to enter the darkness of the flesh, accepting the trade of glorious immortality for finite desires. Mount Hermon, once a place close to the sky, became the launch pad for a spiritual and biological invasion aimed at humanity, overturning the order that heaven had established since the beginning. This event marked the moment the angels became exiles within their own universe. They sealed their fate with a contract of no return, preparing for the unholy unions that would give birth to the monsters of creation. That blood oath still echoes in the deepest strata of Hermon, where those who swore it long ago are now paying the price in chains. The rebellion was consummated on the heights, clearing the way for an era of depravity and slaughter the likes of which the world had never seen. The union of fallen angels and humans. As the Watchers descended from the peak of Hermon, the eternal order of creation was officially shattered. These celestial entities shed their essence of light to take on forms of flesh, entering the valleys of men to seek forbidden unions. The union of divine blood and mortal dust created a mutation unprecedented in the Creator's design. Humanity, in its innocence and awe, opened its doors to welcome these gods, unaware that it was the beginning of a biological annihilation. That unholy conception gave birth to monstrous entity known as the Nephilim. These half-breeds carried the terrifying power of their fathers, but possessed the bottomless greed of earthly flesh. They grew with staggering speed, towering like spires and blotting out the sun for humanity. The Nephilim belonged neither to heaven nor to earth. They were strangers carrying the pride of fallen angels and the ferocity of wild beasts. Their presence on the ground distorted every natural law, turning the earth into a dwelling place for giant monsters. Terror quickly engulfed the world as the appetite of the Nephilim exceeded all of nature's provisions. After consuming all crops, grain, and livestock, these giants turned to devour human flesh and drink the blood of their own kind. Cries for help resounded throughout the valleys at the foot of Mount Hermon, where the blood of the innocent soaked the stones and soil. The earth, originally intended as a garden for man, became a massive slaughterhouse where those carrying angelic blood committed the most barbaric crimes against life. The actions of the Grigori left an indelible scar on the human bloodline. This was not merely lust, it was a conspiracy to corrupt the entire genetic code of creation, rendering the world so defiled it was beyond salvage. Mortal women, once enchanted by the magnificence of the angels, now faced ultimate agony as they watched their offspring massacre the world. This mutation led to a point of no return, forcing heaven to prepare a total purge to wash away the spreading filth. Forbidden knowledge, the legacy of destruction. The corruption of the world did not stem solely from the brutality of the flesh, but also from the theft of divine secrets. The Grigori unsealed the mysteries of heaven, truths never intended for the unrefined souls of mankind. Across the lands beneath the shadows of Mount Hermon, The Watchers began teaching the arts of deception and the power of material manipulation. Knowledge was no longer a beacon of light. It became a sophisticated venom, seeping into the human mind and seducing them away from the Creator. Azazel, the challenger of holiness, taught men how to forge iron and the metals of the earth. From hands that once knew only the plow, humanity began to cast swords, spears, and the engines of war. For the first time, human blood was spilled not by wild beasts, but by sharpened weapons forged under the tutelage of fallen angels. He further instructed women in the use of antimony to beautify the eyelids and the art of using gemstones to flaunt their appearance. This was the inception of vanity and the art of visual manipulation, corrupting the primordial purity of the soul. Simultaneously, Semyaza and other leaders revealed sorcery, the cutting of roots, and malevolent incantations. Knowledge of herbs was twisted into occult rituals designed to control the will and harm fellow beings. Other angels, such as Barkiel and Kokabiel, transmitted the secrets of astrology, the signs of the sun, the moon, and the paths of the stars. Mankind began to worship the creations in the sky rather than their creator, immersing themselves in divination to seek illicit destinies, casting a shroud of delusion over early civilizations. The consequence of these toxic gifts was the total decay of worldly morality. With weapons in their hands and spells in their hearts, humanity ceased seeking righteousness and lunged into slaughter and deceit. The knowledge from Mount Hermon turned the world into a place of chaos, where the strength of steel and the cunning of finery overthrew all truth. The groaning of the earth under the weight of crime and injustice ascended beyond the atmosphere, reaching the ears of the archangels standing guard at the eternal throne, signaling a judgment that could not be reversed. Cries that reached the heavens and the final decree. The lamentations of humanity and the groaning of the earth pierced through the clouds, reaching the crystal gates of heaven. The souls slaughtered by the Nephilim and those tormented by the swords of war cried out for justice from the Most High. The earth, in the ultimate defilement of blood and forbidden knowledge, could no longer conceal its crimes. From the holiest of holies, the four archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, looked down and witnessed a world distorted by the betrayal of their own kind. Before the eternal throne, an epic petition took place. The archangels exposed the crimes of the Watchers, emphasizing the pride of Semyaza and the unrighteousness sown by Azazel. They understood clearly that the order of creation had been violated to a point beyond self-healing. A decree of judgment was immediately issued from the supreme power, shaking the very fabric of the universe. The sentence was not only for the rebellious angels, but was also aimed at the complete eradication of the monstrous legion dominating the earth. The ultimate verdict was sealed with absolute authority. Archangel Raphael was commanded to bind Azazel and cast him into the darkness of the desert of death. Gabriel was charged with inciting self-destruction among the Nephilim, letting the half-breeds slaughter one another to the very last. Michael, the general of the hosts, received the order to seize Semyaza and the entire legion of 200 fallen angels. They would be forced to witness the annihilation of their own offspring before being shackled into eternal darkness beneath Mount Hermon. Sariel was dispatched to inform Noah, son of Lamech, of a purification by water that would sweep away every breath upon the earth. This was a sentence of no return, a rebuilding of the world from the ashes of rebellion. Those who had descended at latitude 33 in false glory now suddenly realized the power of heaven was descending upon them. The atmosphere atop Mount Hermon grew heavy under the pressure of judgment, signaling the end of the era of chaos and the beginning of the eternal damnation of the Watchers. The war among supernatural beings. The sky above Mount Hermon no longer bore the blue of creation. It twisted into the blazing red of fury as the heavenly hosts began to execute the ultimate sentence. By decree of the throne, Archangel Gabriel descended with a power that drove the giant Nephilim into madness. Instead of using a heavenly sword to destroy them, he caused their own envy and ferocity to turn against their own kind. These half-breeds of terrifying strength, whom the Grigori once viewed as the pride of their rebellion, now plunged into a brutal war of self-annihilation. They tore one another apart with bare hands and the strength of flawed gods, turning the lush valleys at the foot of Mount Hermon into a massive slaughterhouse where the bones of monsters piled into new mountains and their blood saturated the defiled earth. As the slaughter unfolded below, Semyaza and the 200 fallen angels were besieged upon the peak by the angelic hosts, forced to watch the destruction of their children in utter helplessness. This was the first spiritual punishment Michael enforced, making the rebels witness the spectacle of everything they had painstakingly built through sin being erased in an instant. Entities that once prided themselves on their unnatural creative powers now tasted the terror of seeing their own blood spilled incessantly without being able to intervene. The screams of the fallen angels echoed through the ravines of Hermon, mingling with the roars of the dying Nephilim, creating a funeral dirge for the end of an era of chaos. When the last giant fell, and the earth no longer held the warmth of Nephilim life, Michael and the angelic hosts advanced toward the rebels to execute the next part of the sentence. A supernatural confrontation occurred in terrifying majesty, where the power of righteousness completely overwhelmed the pride of the fallen. There was no glory, no false teachings, and no forbidden spells that could withstand the might of the celestial court. Semyaza and his legion were subdued, their celestial radiance stripped away forever by blades of light, giving way to the nakedness and shame of prisoners awaiting eternal torment. The war concluded as the 200 angels were led to the mouths of the darkest fissures on Mount Hermon. The great rebellion of the Watchers officially collapsed at the feet of the generals of heaven. They were no longer the rulers of the earth, but exiles stripped of all honor, preparing to step into the darkness of the earth's core. The image of the fallen legion being escorted into the heart of the mountain marked a brutal transition from the radiant angels of the highest heaven to entities shackled in the deepest abyss, beginning an imprisonment spanning 70 human generations. The ravines of eternal isolation. As the blades of the supernatural war fell silent, Mount Hermon was instantly transformed into the greatest dungeon in the chronicles of heaven. There, Michael began to execute a sentence of absolute containment through total isolation. The 200 fallen angels, who had once stood together upon the radiant summit to swear a blood oath, were now severed from one another by dense geological strata. This was a punishment aimed directly at their pride. Those who had used unity to rebel must now endure ultimate loneliness, facing their own sins in a darkness without end. Deep beneath Mount Hermon, where the light of the stars has never reached, the ultimate iron chains began to tighten. Unlike mortal shackles, These chains were forged from the authority of the decree of righteousness, binding into the very essence of the fallen beings' souls. Each link that constricted was a seal upon their celestial power, pinning those who were once immortal to the cold, abrasive limestone walls. Semyaza, who had lured his comrades into sin for fear of facing punishment alone, was now forced to endure that exact fear for eternity. He was confined within the deepest cavern, bound in a kneeling position, his face turned toward everlasting darkness, so that he might never again behold celestial glory. The weight of millions of tons of mountain rock pressed down upon shoulders that once bore wings of light, making every breath of the rebels as heavy as the groaning of the earth. The only sound in this dungeon was the rhythmic dripping of water from stalactites and the chilling scrape of metal against ancient stone as they struggled in vain. There were no echoing screams of comrades to share the pain, no worship from humanity to soothe their wounded pride. This brutal isolation transformed regret into their sole executioner, breaking the wills of entities that once smugly believed themselves to be the gods of this world. The sentence of isolation at Hermon completely dismantled the power structure of the fallen legion, turning them from a mighty army into solitary prisoners, awaiting the term of 70 generations. Mount Hermon officially became a seal, eternally separating light and darkness, where the souls of the rebels must exist as conscious ghosts within the rock. The secret of this imprisonment lies deep in the terrifying shadow of the dungeon, where they must lie in wait, listening to the passage of time in the silence of an earthly hell, before the great flood arrived to wash away the filth on the surface above. 70 generations in chains and the great flood. When the fissures of Mount Hermon were sealed by Michael under the decree of the Lord of Hosts, the sky above began to writhe in fury. Torrents from the celestial vaults poured down, and the fountains of the deep burst forth, creating an unprecedented purification by floodwater. From within their dark dungeon, through the narrow cracks of the strata, Semyaza and the angelic legion were forced to witness a horrific spectacle, the total annihilation of their Nephilim children. The giants of hybrid blood, once the pride and embodiment of rebellion, became tiny before the wrath of the ocean. They shrieked, clinging to the final rocky outcrops of Hermon's peak, but the flood spared no one. The fallen angels watched as their offspring were swept away by the violent waves, their massive corpses bobbing on the black water before slowly sinking into the abyss. This pain was not merely loss. It was a direct retribution upon the souls of those who dared to twist the order of creation, to bring such monstrous entities into being. The sentence of 70 generations was established as a grim countdown. Michael bound these 200 entities in a kneeling posture, their limbs shackled backward against sharp rock walls, ensuring that any attempt to move caused the iron chains to bite deeper into their immortal flesh. In analyzing this time frame, God did not use a single day of heaven, which equals 1,000 earthly years, to bring a swift end. Instead, he forced them to count every human breath across the dynasties. In the darkness of the Hermon dungeon, each passing mortal generation was another time these angels had to hear the sound of the old world dissolving and the new world forming above. They were imprisoned long enough to see that every bit of forbidden knowledge they had taught, every weapon they had forged, was buried in dust by the flood and the passage of time. In the thick darkness, isolation began to erode Semyaza's will. He was trapped in a narrow stone cell where the ceiling was so low he could not lift his head, a direct punishment for one who had once proudly sought to look upon the Most High throne. The steady drip of water on ancient stone became the only sound to break the silence, a rhythm that served as a reminder of the slow crawl of the 70-generation term. His comrades, imprisoned in neighboring ravines, suffered the same fate. Their once resplendent wings were now tattered, covered in the mud and mold of the dungeon, devoid of any angelic aura. They were left in a state of absolute consciousness, unable to sleep, unable to die, feeling only the crushing weight of millions of tons of earth pressing upon their presence. The crux of this imprisonment was this: while Noah and the new lineage began to farm the dry land, the fallen angels remained chained like rotting roots beneath the mountain. They had to witness a new humanity flourish without ever knowing of their existence. This oblivion was a fatal blow to their pride. Those once worshipped as deities were now merely ghosts buried alive, invisible to the eyes of the world. The chains beneath Mount Hermon did not just hold their flesh. They blocked all their influence on the history being rewritten. 70 generations was a long, arduous journey of decay, where every hope of a second rebellion was extinguished by the eternal silence of stone and water, awaiting the final judgment when this dungeon would open to lead them to the fiery abyss. The ghosts of the Nephilim and the Gate of Hermon. As the flood waters receded and the ground dried at the foot of Mount Hermon, what remained was not just mud and corpses. A terrifying truth emerged from the purification. The souls of the dead Nephilim hybrids could not be destroyed by water, because they possessed a half-immortal celestial nature from their fathers. The Grigori shackled below. These spirits became trapped between two worlds. They were not permitted to enter heaven due to their defilement, nor could they descend to hell before the day of judgment. These disembodied entities became demons, wandering the caves and valleys of Mount Hermon, carrying a frantic hunger for the mortal flesh they had lost. For thousands of years thereafter, the peak of Hermon persisted as a hotspot of spiritual rebellion. Here, the boundary between the spirit realm and the human realm was so thin that echoes from Semyaza's dungeon frequently leaked out, attracting those who worshipped dark gods and performed sacrificial rituals. Ancient empires erected temples upon the rocky summit, inadvertently reinforcing Hermon's status as a gateway to hell. The presence of Nephilim spirits wandering the earth, combined with the resentment of the fallen angels shackled beneath, turned this mountain into a fortress of darkness, challenging every effort to redeem humanity. However, as history turned a new page, an inversive event occurred at the very heart of this darkness. Jesus led his disciples to the region of Caesarea Philippi at the foot of Mount Hermon. This was no coincidental journey, but an advance into the very lair of the enemy. On the very mountain where the Grigori had sworn their oath of rebellion and lay in chains, Jesus performed the transfiguration. The brilliant light of heaven blazed upon the summit of Hermon, shining through the rock fissures and penetrating the darkest dens of the dungeon. This event was a public decree. The glory of the Most High had reclaimed its position over the most cursed place. In an epic analysis, the transfiguration on Mount Hermon was a crushing blow to the final hopes of Semyaza and the fallen legion. From the darkness of their chains, they were forced to feel the power of the light they once betrayed, now present directly above them to re-establish the reign of heaven. The Nephilim ghosts were driven away, and Hermon's status as a skygate was restored in victory. Yet, even as the light shone, the sentence of 70 generations was not over. The prisoners remained there in the silence of the earth, waiting for the final breaths of the age to face ultimate judgment. The abyss of fire and the final judgment. 70 generations passed like grains of sand falling slowly in the eternal hourglass of the Most High. Beneath Mount Hermon, the millennial silence began to be broken by tremors from the very core of the strata. This was no mortal geological shifting, but the fracturing of ancient seals. The iron chains that had bound Semyaza and the fallen legion began to glow with heat, signaling that the term of temporary imprisonment had reached its end. The entities buried alive in darkness for so long now felt a new power piercing through the thick limestone, not the light of redemption, but the heat of ultimate destruction. The final sentence was carried out as the Ravines of Hermon split wide, opening a path leading directly from the subterranean dungeon to the abyss of fire. This is the place prophesied in the Book of Enoch, a realm devoid of life, where the fire is never quenched and perdition is everlasting. Michael and the legion of the heavenly hosts appeared once more, not to arrest, but to escort the prisoners of darkness to their place of execution. Semyaza, the initiator of the blood oath, and his 200 comrades were led out of the darkness of Hermon in a state of exhaustion, their celestial radiance completely stripped away, leaving only the nakedness of rebellious souls. In this abyss, the second death awaited them. Analyzing this judgment, we see absolute justice. Those who brought forbidden knowledge to corrupt the world must now be isolated from the flow of existence itself. They were cast into the eternal fire, where the pain comes not only from the heat, but from the permanent dissolution of their being. Every power, every memory of their false greatness on Mount Hermon was incinerated. This was the end of the journey of the fall, an eternal silence, replacing the sound of chains, where even the names of the rebels were erased from the chronicles of heaven. Though the sentence has been carried out, Mount Hermon still stands as an eternal landmark, holding within its heart the empty ravines that once imprisoned angels. Questions still linger in the mist of the peak. Has humanity truly learned the lesson from the damnation of these most radiant beings? Or do the echoes of the blood oath still smolder somewhere in the cold winds, waiting for a new pride to rise from the human heart? The mystery of Latitude 33 remains a seal of history, reminding the world that the boundary between heaven and the abyss is separated only by an oath of rebellion. The epic journey of the Watchers at Mount Hermon has concluded in the fires of judgment, leaving a solemn stillness for all of creation. For both glory and ruin begin with a choice. The seal at Hermon has closed, but the warning for humanity remains forever. Heaven or the abyss, it all lies in the heart of the one who dares to touch the forbidden. Maintain your vigilance, for the judgment of the Most High is righteous and eternal. May the heart of every person always find its way back to the light of truth, so as never to go astray. May faith guide your way through every darkness. If you feel the call of faith through these words, please leave an amen to help spread His light. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to join the community, where we learn together, hold fast to our faith, and walk in the guidance of the Lord every day. May the peace and blessings of the Lord be with you and your family. Amen.